in a year. Here to discuss is Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul, it's always a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch. First, to what the president wants to do. The president wants to borrow and give $35 billion to teachers and first responders. How the devil is that going to stimulate the economy?
I thought we already did that. We already had a $1 trillion stimulus package, and it didn't work. Unemployment actually went up. So I don't know how the son of stimulus is going to work any differently.
What is the proposal that you and I believe Senator Portman and Senator McCain advanced yesterday or earlier today, which is intended to release people from the burdens that the government sometimes puts on them?
Well, instead of like the president's program, he wants to increase taxes. We decrease tax rates, simplify the tax code, put into effect a regulatory moratorium, say that all new regulations have to be passed by Congress, have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and open up energy production, drilling offshore, mining of coal, you name it, we open up domestic energy production. We think altogether we could create as many as 5 million jobs, not by the government creating the jobs, but by freeing up the private marketplace to create the jobs.
All right, now I want you to make my day because I have fantasized about this. What would the new tax rates be? What would corporate rates be? What would personal rate, individual rates be?
Well, you're getting too giddy because they're not going to be as good as you'd like. I'd like it to be down around 17%, but we got a consensus of folks that agreed to go to 25 and 10. That's 25 for the top individual rate, but that's much lower than what we have.
Right.
25 for the corporate rate, and then a 10% lower rate for individuals. It does eliminate deductions and some loopholes in the tax code. It makes it simpler. But really, lowering the corporate income tax, we think, would be a big generator of jobs. We also think not adding new regulations and trying to take away regulations would help. And also the energy production. We have great natural resources in our country. We think we could create 1 million jobs just in the energy sector.
What about things like regulatory agencies who do things that the Congress would never do, like the EPA imposing regulations which the Congress itself decided not to pass, or the NLRB saying to Boeing, you can't move from Washington to South Carolina, even though you just built $1 billion plant the size of 11 football fields there, it's going to stand empty.
Well, every year, about 200 regulations are promulgated by regulatory agencies that cost the economy over $100 million per regulation. We take those regulations and say they cannot become law unless they're voted on by both houses of Congress and signed by the president. I think this reform alone would take a lot of power away from the unelected bureaucrats.
This would radically change the regulatory state, because there's a lot of people watching us now might not know. There's a vast body of regulators out there who are not elected. Some of them are civil service. Some of them have been appointed by the president. They can write regulations independent of the Congress. Federal district court judges can't even interfere with those. You have to sue in a specific court, and the only question is, did the regulators abuse their authority? Stated differently, they can write almost any regulation they want, impose it on business or impose it on groups, and it stays the law for many years. You've suggested what I think is a brilliant way to change that.
Well, and here's a good example. You've heard of people having their property taken away because the government says it's a wetlands?
Yes.
Congress never wrote anything about wetlands. Congress wrote something called the Clean Water Act, and then the regulatory bodies came up with this term wetlands, and they invented this concept that if birds landed on the Everglades and then flew and landed on your property in Kentucky, somehow you were part of an interstate wetlands contingent. So really, a lot of these rules were written by unelected people, and really Congress had no say in what was written.
Well, why does the government enjoy doing this? I mean, you're not talking about a hypothetical case. You're talking about a real case where a couple in Idaho, the government is trying to condemn their property. I don't mean pay them for it. I mean take it away from them and not give them a nickel because of literally the birds and the fish that are in their backyard.
Well, here's the amazing thing. The property of this couple near Priest Lake, Idaho, it doesn't touch the lake. It doesn't touch a stream. It has no standing water. In fact, they say they've never seen water on their property. There's a house on either side of them. They already have a sewage hookup that's been put in the ground. It's a residential development project, and the government's telling them it's a wetlands, and it's their the onus is on these people who bought the property to prove it's not a wetlands. And this will go to the Supreme Court, and I have high hopes that we have enough rational minds on the Supreme Court to overturn this.
I don't want to get in the weeds, but that's another change that you and Senator McCain and Senator Portman can propose. The onus of proving the regulation should be on the regulatory agency rather than the onus on the victim of that regulation disproving it.
Absolutely.
All right, switching gears. Earlier today, or I guess it was yesterday, your dad, Congressman Ron Paul, made a sweeping and bold proposal to cut $1 trillion in spending should he ever become president. That's enormous. That's larger than even the proposal that you made a couple of months ago when the budget was being debated. How does something like that rest on Capitol Hill, which seems to be filled with big government spenders in both houses and in both parties?
Well, you know, I'm kind of jealous because he's upstaged me by cutting twice as much as I proposed. And he's also going to balance the budget within one term, or really in the third year of office. So I am a little bit jealous, but I'm very supportive. The thing is when you look at the details, you can cut $1 trillion, but you have to eliminate some departments. It's like Dr. Soul said, you have to eliminate things like the Department of Commerce, which are just chock full of corporate welfare. Should we really be flying around corporate heads on government jets? That's something that the Occupy Wall Street people ought to complain about, is government money being given to these corporations, not capitalism, but the crony capitalism where government is giving away welfare to big businesses. That's a legitimate complaint. My father would eliminate all of that and get rid of all the subsidies to business, and I think we'd radically transform this country. But I think you'd also see a boom in the stock market like you've never seen if we balanced our budget within one term.
Oh, absolutely. What about the Defense Department? Are Republicans coming around to the idea that the wars have gone on long enough that neither of them, I'm talking about Afghanistan and Iraq, even though there are others, as you know, neither of them presently serves the national security needs of the country, that the troops ought to come home and we ought to stop spending trillions?
I think this is probably my father's most important contribution, is that even other candidates on the stage are beginning to come around. You've heard Romney talk about bringing home troops from Afghanistan. You've heard Rick Perry say something about we don't need so much military adventurism. You've heard Michelle Bachmann say we should declare war in Libya. That's all coming out of the Ron Paul playbook, and I think it's that they're listening and that the public is telling these candidates that they need to behave more like Ron Paul.
Before I let you go, have you made an official public endorsement of which of the Republican candidates you're going to support?
You know, I haven't done that. I've been saying I'm leaning in the direction of this Ron Paul guy. But you know what? I'd like to make some news tonight, and I'd say I'm officially endorsing Ron Paul for president.
Good to hear it, and I must say, no surprise. Senator Rand Paul, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
He's for universal health care.